Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Bat of Doom track at Virtual KernelCon 2020. Our next speaker is Mikey T, and he's going to talk about the black magic that is radio. Mikey was going to do some stuff in our village had we had an in-person event, but we were able to convert that to a talk, so you guys can still experience some of that village experience that we'd otherwise be missing, not having that in-person experience. And maybe we can get Mikey T to come do it next year, and you guys can all see it in person. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mike.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And good morning, nearly afternoon, everybody. This is Mikey T. We're going to talk a little bit about pirate radio, what it is, if you're interested in getting involved in it, and to the most part, how to stay out of trouble if you do decide to go down this route. Um, I've been in amateur radio for about 10 years, call sign over there, cyber engineer, Formula One junkie, musician, play guitar, and I really just like to take things apart and put them back together and hope they work again. But understanding how things work and radio has been around forever, and it's just a natural, I think, tendency to take apart a radio when you're a kid and find out what's inside of it and how it works. So that's kind of how I got started in this. And I think the farther I got in it and the more I learned about it, the more I realized that I didn't know anything about it. I still know very little, but I'm learning more and more about it every day. The digital age has really changed the way that radios are built, but it has not changed in very many significant ways how things are put together. So let's dive in and see what's going on here. Before we get started, though, I just want to formally disclaim that this is an entertainment presentation for education purposes only. I am not suggesting that you go out and buy a large radio and start broadcasting and stomping on and over people, because the FCC does pay attention to these things if you are reported. Um, and I'm representing myself personally, and all these images are, well, they're not mine. So, what is pirate radio actually? It's nothing more than transmitting on some radio space that you don't own. In the United States of America, of course, that's controlled by the FCC. Other places have their own governing bodies. Um, we're talking about specifically, AM radio and FM radio, which are the commercial spaces, but all other spaces are also controlled by the FCC. So that's all the amateur radio spaces, the military spaces, everything that you can imagine on the spectrum, from ELF, which is 10 hertz, right, shaking the earth type stuff, all the way up to the gigahertz that satellites talk back and forth through, and microwaves and lasers and all those other things. They're all controlled by the FCC. Everything but this little tiny band called the Citizens Band, which is your CB radio guys, and you should stay away from them because they're ruinous. All right. So also keep in mind that even a couple of milliwatts of transmitted power could get you noticed, and noticed means that you're going to get investigated. This picture at the bottom is Radio Caroline. In 1968, there was a guy named Rohan O'Reilly, and he was a manager of musicians, and he couldn't get any of his musicians that he represented onto the radio over in the UK. He tried and tried and couldn't do it. So he bought this ship, and he put a 50,000 watt transmitter on it, and he parked it just outside the UK, and he blasted them with his music. And at that time, it wasn't illegal to do so. So when we talk about pirate radio, here's the first guy who really took advantage of a situation where he put big radios on a trolling ship. He sat it outside a place, and he ended up doing what he wanted to do with it. And this has been going on for, well, since then. It's now digital and internet, but at the time, they couldn't touch him because he was outside of their national waters doing what he wanted to do. So I want to get up into this FM thing. Why can't I? It's not hurting anybody, right? Well, here's the thing. Um, Commercial radio stations buy that space, and they spend a lot of money on it. Advertisers, they buy airtime on that space, and that costs them a lot of money, and that's how the commercial radio guys make their money. And there are laws that regulate who can broadcast when, how much, things like strength, emissions. It's all controlled, right? And so they're not just going to sit there and watch, and listen to you smash them, or interfere with the business that they're doing. Not only that, but any gear that you and I can afford, it's crappy. It's crappy to the point where there's enough interference coming from those devices that you're going to make a mess of the space on either side of you. And that means interfering with television, other electronics, garage door openers, if you name it. If it's electrical, there's a chance that your spurious emissions are going to interfere with the proper working of that thing. So that's something to keep in mind. And that's usually what gets people. It's not that they're broadcasting, it's that they are messing up something and someone complains, and then they investigate that, and then they find you, and then the FCC gets involved. Need I say more? Okay, so let's say that's fine. We want to get started anyway. How should we get started? You buy a radio, you can build it yourself. The simplest way to do this is going to be to buy it, because once you buy it, you're going to want to know how it works, and that's when you're going to take it apart, and that's when you're going to learn how the circuits work on the inside, and that's how you're probably going to start hacking into these things and modifying. So you need a transmitter, you need a noise source, a halfway good microphone for your voice, and some type of audio source, right? So a laptop with music on it, your phone with some music on it, a microphone stuck into the front of your guitar so you can play areas to your friends and family. Okay, it's simple to go, and once you hook this up and turn it on, it will broadcast. Go out to eBay and find new or used equipment. Do the same thing on Amazon. You'll notice that the top one, it's 1.5 to 15 watt stereo, 87 to 108 hertz. The one underneath it is 15 watts. The one underneath it, it's 10 watts. And then the bands are a little different. But I will tell you something right now, that when you buy one of those and you take it out of the metal box, it's this, okay? It doesn't matter. It's just this tiny little thing. Now, think about your grandpa's ham radio. He had all those tubes. Your old TVs had all those tubes. And some of those tubes were input tubes, and some of those tubes were the big output tubes. I want to show you this tiny little square right there. That's the 15 watt output transformer for that rig. It's awesome. And they work okay. But any manufacturer that says, hey, we're in compliance with the FCC Title 47 Part 15, no, they're not. Okay, because FCC Title 47 Part 15, we're talking about milliwatts of power. We're talking about the kind of power that your microwave puts out, or the kind of frequencies that your laptop puts out when it's running. It has nothing to do with this. This gear isn't built to good specifications, so you're going to have all sorts of spurious transmissions that are coming from this little rig, and they're going to be stomping on bandwidth on both sides. And that maybe doesn't sound like a problem, but to the FCC and to your neighbors, it is a problem. And why is that? Because power, it really defines the signal strength and the way the signal behaves through all these tiny electronics, as well as through things like your house and other physical structures. Okay, 1 watt of power typically through line of sight can travel about a mile. Those old little transmitters you used to plug into your cigarette lighter of your car. Sorry, new kids, old cars used to have cigarette lighters. You would plug that in, and it would have a little dial that you could dial in a stereo, right, your FM station, and then you plug your Zune into that same device, and it would broadcast from that little device into your radio, and you'd be able to take your own music with you. Right, those are between 5 and 15 milliwatts. Whole home pro install FM station, so you can have your music in the house, at the pool, wherever you want it. That's about 1 watt. It doesn't take a lot of power to do this kind of stuff. And if you buy something with 15 or 50 or 100 watts, those will go miles and miles, and you will create a lot more trouble for yourself and for your neighbors if you use something like that. So find a unit that has variable power. How about frequencies? So 88 to 108, that's FM radio. Find a place that's dead, but also find a place on the dial that has the least chance of interfering with something else. So if you think about it, well, the whole FM band sits between channel 6 and channel 7 of VHF, which is, your your over the air TV, which is still in use in a lot of places, um, especially the big cities. So 108 is shared by the FM radio and channel 6. So if you're low enough on the 88 megahertz channel in FM stereo, you can usually capture the audio sidetrack of channel 6 broadcast. You don't want to be down there messing around with your radio at that time because it'll cause some trouble. Stay on the high side. You have some space between you and channel 7, which starts on 174 megahertz. So it's going to be safer for you. It's going to be opportunity to still stay undetected and to not have those kind of spurious emissions that are going to make the neighbors suspicious or get them to start complaining. Because again, if they complain to the radio station or the TV station or whoever you're interfering with, and enough people are complaining, they'll call the FCC, and the FCC will send an agent out to investigate. And if they find you, then we have trouble. And so just keep that in mind. All right. So what's going to get you? The interference. We talked about that a couple different times. Using too much power when just 1 watt or less than 1 watt will do for all of your experimental needs. They have like about 6 FCC offices in the major cities, and this is their job. But they also cover vast parts of America. And their job is also to track down the interference that happens from this gear. If you get caught, the first offense is usually, hey, stop doing it and don't make us come back here. There's legislation right now, federal legislation, to make the fine, which used to be about $10,000 per day, $100,000 a day. So I don't know if they're using this because it's becoming a bigger issue, or if they're just planning on cracking down more. And that little lady next door is going to miss her Dancing with the Stars finale if you are fuzzing up her TV and she's OTA. So we're going to be nice about this to her too. So my tips for you, if you want to get started in radio, buy a little FM rig, start yourself small, use low power. You don't need anything fancy. A microphone or your phone will plug directly into the radio inputs, and you can send that traffic, if you will, those radio waves out to your other devices, across your yard, down the street. If you're having a block party, tell everybody to bring out their radios and you can share the music. Those are kind of some of the fun things to do with this information. But more than anything else, be curious. How does this thing work? Why does it do what it does? How does it do what it does? How can I modify it to make it different, better, worse? And expect that you'll have some situations where things won't go well. Again, one final disclaimer. They're electrical devices, and so you just have to have a certain level of comfort around and understand what things you should or should not be touching, because there is a opportunity to have a electrical situation. My biggest tip, though, is to have fun with this stuff and stay curious. And then I will open this up for any questions anybody might have.
Sounds like you might have some experience with having electrical problems with electrical systems, like you're an engineer at an electrical place or something.
I learned a long time ago that if you're ever touching anything that's open and alive, keep one hand in your pocket. That way, if you do come across high voltage, you have a better chance of surviving it.
We have a couple of questions. I think that I don't know. I think these are sort of quick, and I don't know if you know the answers or not, but they're definitely related. the one person, Ohio Tech's asking, when did the FCC stop requiring Morse code knowledge to get a ham license?
Okay, good question. I think that happened about, I want to say 10 years ago or so. And the reason they did that is because as more and more people moved more towards this digital platform, it's learning the code, I think, in their opinion, were keeping some people from getting licensed where they otherwise might now in these modern ages. And Morse code isn't easy to learn at first, but after you get the hang of it, it's very easy to learn. So now you don't need Morse code to get any of the licenses in the FCC. But there are a lot of enthusiasts that still learn it and still use it, specifically because it's such low power and the distances are very, very great, and it has a very narrow bandwidth, so it can cut through when other forms of communication like voice or even video won't make it.
Gotcha. Um, Two kind of related questions. Um, how much does the FCC like actually patrol? And then related to that, like if you're underneath certain thresholds, you're clearly a hobbyist and you're technically violating some spectrum law, but you're not doing anything malicious. Like how much is that policed and how bad is it actually?
Those are really good questions. In major areas like Florida, especially down in Miami, there are a lot of people who bought a lot of power and they shoot it at Cuba, right? They're uh, inundating that country with Radio Free Cuba and all those things, but they're also smashing on each other inside the metropolis of Miami as well. So the FBI will make their sweeps. And if they find people that are in violation or the expected violation, they'll bring in the FCC guys to actually coordinate and take the measurements necessary to formally ask them to stop doing what they're doing or fine them if there is trouble. Um, I think the last big case was some guy in New York City a couple years ago who just wouldn't stop, and he was running like uh, 25,000 watts off of the rooftop of one of the buildings in, I think it was Brooklyn. And he was selling that radio time to DJs and other people. So they would come in. And so he probably would have gotten fined if it had just been him and he was just kind of a hobbyist with a big mouth. But because he was making money off of the radio time that he was selling on that illegal pirate, they raked him over the coals. And so that was kind of their the litmus for this new legislation that's coming out now that makes the fines 10 times higher, because now they realize that people aren't just going to stop. So you got to make that slap on the wrist a lot more powerful.
Gotcha. Have you, I don't know enough about this to word the question any better, but have you done any tinkering with long range or like extreme long range signals, like trying to pick stuff up from distant areas?
Oh, absolutely. So if you buy yourself a small, it doesn't even have to be a transmitter. It can just be a receiver, but it has to be shortwave. So it has to be able to listen for those weak frequencies in certain areas of the spectrum. You can hang a straight wire off of the back of that. The longer the wire, the better. So you could run it around the entire length of your fence. And as long as you ground it properly, so it's not shorting out to earth and think it's a short antenna, you can pick up things uh, halfway around the world. It just depends on the atmospheric conditions and if the radio wants to ride those waves over. Um, you know, I I've talked to people in Scandinavia when the weather is right.
I was gonna say that was my next question. You sort of have to do like time of day, time of year, current meteorological conditions.
Yes. Now, one of the other fascinating things I'll leave you with is there's actually a part of the hobby where people are using moon bounce to talk to each other. So you can send a Yagi up to the moon, send a signal that says, "This is my name." And if someone is pointing to the moon at the right time, they can send back, "I heard you, and this is mine," bouncing off the moon.
Awesome. That's fun stuff. Thanks, Mikey T.
You're very welcome, and everybody have a great day.
Uh,